You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network.
There's a team that's in our hearts. We've got love that won't depart. We are always in the stands, 'cause we're super Dolphin fans. Football is mighty rough. Winning gets awful tough. We're rooting for the Dolphins. Our mighty, mighty Dolphins. We're rooting for the Dolphins. Our mighty, mighty Dolphins.
Hello, Miami Dolphin fans, and welcome to the Same Old Dolphin Show, part of the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. I'm Josh Katzker. With me today and every day is my brother from the exact same mother, Aaron the Brain. Aaron, say hello to the people.
Hello to the people.
Brain, it's good to be with you. How was your bye week?
Bye week was nice. I got some things done this weekend. I built a dresser. I bought a dresser from IKEA and I built it and hung out with the family, and I got to watch the Housewives, and I got to have some good meals, and I didn't have to plan my day around 3 hours of misery in the middle of my Sunday afternoon. It was quite nice.
That's pretty fantastic. That sounds like an outstanding use of time there. So congratulations on that. I spent a chunk of the weekend on Saturday. I went up to the Adirondacks to watch my cousin John get married, which was really cool. And as it happens, the Miami Dolphins factored heavily into the wedding. It was he mentioned it in his vows. Our other cousin David officiated the wedding, and he mentioned the Dolphins in his prepared remarks. And then the bride, Sarah, also said, she did in her vows all of this whole thing about how, she's a team player and being on a team with John is really wonderful and really great. And she's really happy to do that. And she said, and of course, because I'm a team player, I guess that makes me a Miami Dolphin fan now. And I was fired up. I cheered. There were other people in the house that were not so happy, as you could imagine, with this being a wedding involving people from Central New York. But hey, I'm going to take what I can get. So yeah, it was great. It was a great wedding. Shout out to John and Sarah. Congratulations to them. Congratulations to Mom, our cousin Tammy, who is a very, very proud Miami Dolphin fan, who the cabin where this wedding took place, a very small wedding in the Adirondacks, tiny little cabin where they got married and where the party was held and where a lot of people were staying, had a big buffalo head on the wall. And Tammy got decked out in her Miami Dolphins gear and took some photos with the buffalo head, which was pretty exciting and pretty fun. Some good photos there. So shout out to everybody involved there. And then Sunday was much more relaxing because I was able to just kind of kick back and hang out and casually watch football, which football is a lot more fun when I'm just watching it sort of casually and not like, hanging on every last second of everything. But we're here to talk about the Dolphins. And what we figured that we would do today, because this is typically the episode where we're reacting to the game that just took place over the course of the weekend previous. And because the Dolphins didn't play this week, we wanted to take a look at where things stand right now and to sort of look at the rest of the season through a negative lens, but also through a positive lens. And I think, and as we get into some of the more negative points, which we're going to start with, I think a lot of that is going to sound familiar because you've heard it, repeated ad nauseum over the last few weeks. And then we'll also, make a positive case. And, some of that might be a little bit wish casting. It might be, trying really hard to look for positive things, but we're going to do it. We're going to do this exercise because at the end of the day, look, the Dolphins have only played 5 games. They've got 12 games left. And as bad as it has seemed for a lot of it, It's the old cliche of there's still most of the season to go. So long way to go, everything to play for, all of that, all of those cliches. So we're going to talk about all of that on this episode. But before we do that, a quick reminder to, if you're not doing so already, make sure you're following us at Amplified to Rock, at Aaron the Brain, at Same Old Dolphins. You can follow me also on Blue Sky. Brain isn't over on Blue Sky yet. He's still on the Twitter machine, but you can follow us there. Download, rate, review, and subscribe to the Same Old Dolphin Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, everywhere you get your podcast. Make sure you are visiting DolphinsTalk.com each and every day. It is your one-stop shop for all things Miami Dolphins. Leave us a 5-star rating. Leave us a positive review. Make sure you have subscribed to the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. And, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out Dolphins Talk Extra, where you can, for as little as $3 a month, get extra episodes of the Same Old Dolphin Show, extra episodes of Dolphins Talk, access to our Discord server, live interactive shows, all kinds of stuff over there. And it's for as little as $3 a month. And we appreciate everybody who has signed up already. And of course, also, if you're a Dolphins Talk Extra subscriber, it means you're getting this episode of the Same Old Dolphin Show live as it happens, instead of on demand on YouTube after the fact. So shout out to everybody watching us live today, like Mr. McDolphin, who is here in the chat. Yep. Thanks for joining us, Mr. McDolphin. We appreciate you. Okay. So, Brain, let's look at the season here right now. Okay. A third of the season basically is in the books. It will be officially 1/3 of the way through the NFL season once this Bills-Jets Monday Night Football game is in the books. And it's fairly simple to say that things have not played out the way most Miami Dolphin fans would have hoped or expected. But the victory in week 5 over the Patriots and the bye week have provided let's call it a temporary salve for Dolphin fans. So what we want to do today is take a look at the rest of the season and look at it from a negative perspective and look at it from a positive perspective. And like, there are reasons to be both pessimistic and optimistic about this season, right? I was thinking about, calling this silver linings and something else, but I couldn't figure out whatever the opposite of a silver lining is. So if you have an idea for what is the opposite of a silver lining, you let us know in the comments.
Would it be the black cloud?
Silver linings and black clouds, maybe. Black clouds and silver linings could be. That would have been a good title for the show, but it's negatives and positives is what I've ended up with, which, whatever. That's where we are. So let's get into some negatives and positives, shall we?
Sure.
All right. Let's start on the negatives. We'll start with the negatives. Again, a lot of these are talking points that you will have heard in recent weeks, either from us or other places in the media. And then we'll end with the positives. But Brain, for me, first and foremost, the injury bug is already biting the Miami Dolphins' heart. Tua's missed 4 games so far. We think he's going to be back in week 8, but we don't know that. Jalen Phillips is out for the year again. Raheem Mostert has been unhealthy. Javon Holland now has a broken hand. Bradley Chubb, we've just heard, is still not ready yet, is still nowhere near ready to go. Isaiah Wynn, nobody knows what the deal is with Isaiah Wynn. It's not been good. And Brain, in mapping out this season, when we started, before the season started, and we were trying to figure out what the most likely outcomes were to the season, the key, probably the biggest key to avoiding the worst possible outcomes, was going to be health. And the Dolphins have not been healthy.
It's true. They've been decidedly not healthy. And, even if you were to bake in, I mean, obviously the Tua thing, like going into the season, you knew what your backup quarterback situation was. You knew the way this offense was built around Tua. You knew what we saw back in 2022 versus what we saw in 2023. And we knew that this offense is going to go as Tua goes. And so for Tua to get hurt in the second game of the season, obviously that's the big story. That's the cloud that is hung over the team for the first stretch of this season. But, The Jalen Phillips injury is huge. This Javon Holland injury has the potential of being huge. The idea of bringing in Odell Beckham Jr. so you have more depth in the receiving core, and then he starts the season on the PUP list. You went out and you drafted Malik Washington, and he was basically injured the first 3-4 weeks of the season as well. It's pretty rough. Even with the Mostert injury as well, for it to happen early in the season before Jalen Wright has really been weaned into the offense. That's an injury where I think if everybody is healthy and then Raheem Mostert gets injured in like week 8, week 9, you easily can, recover from that injury and replace him with Jalen Wright. But the fact that you go into the season and Raheem Mostert's your inside guy and Devon Achane is your outside guy, and those are your two, that's your plan to start the season. And then Mostert gets hurt late in week 1, and now you're using Achane at an extremely high usage rate, and now Achane gets hurt. It has not gone according to plan, to say the least. And every team is going to have injuries. Every team is going to be banged up. And I don't know that the Dolphins have necessarily had significantly more injuries this year than most teams. It's the quarterback injury that is the one that is really hurting them. And then obviously, the Jalen Phillips injury, I think, is going to impact this team long term. And we'll see what happens with the Javon Holland injury. But certainly because of those things, it capped a ceiling that, depending on what you thought about this team, I think, some people thought the ceiling of this team was already lower than what it was last year. I know you and I both thought the ceiling of this team was already lower than what it was last year. And so those things happen, and not only is the ceiling lower, but now also the floor is lower. And so it kind of opens up all of those worst case scenarios that we thought had a very low probability of happening. I still think the really, really disastrous, 0-6 win season, I still think it's a relatively low likelihood of happening, but it's a lot more likely now than it was coming into the season.
Sure. Yeah, I do think it is probably much more likely that the Dolphins avoid the bottom falling out than the bottom actually falling out. But let's move on to the next point for me, which is a negative way to look at the rest of the season. And for me, it's that Mike McDaniel has shown little to no growth as a game manager. Brain, in 2022, I remember this vividly, when the Dolphins lost that Sunday night game, that snowy Sunday night game in Buffalo. Mike and I, we did the live watch along, and we were roasted for laying into Mike McDaniel for abandoning the run. We heard he's a rookie head coach. He'll learn and grow. Then throughout last season, the year before that, 2022, we harped on Mike McDaniel's poor decision-making regarding challenges, his poor play calling in 3rd and 4th down and short situations. We heard similar refrains. Oh, he's a rookie head coach. He's going to grow. When Mike McDaniel refused to simplify his game plans for his backup quarterbacks, again, we heard how it's his inexperience. That's to blame. McDaniel himself has said time and time again how blame does fall to him and he needs to be better. Well, now here we are. It's year 3. Most of these same issues persist. The growth, if any, is marginal at best. We continue to see discipline as an issue. Dumb penalties persist. Mike McDaniel beats the drum of accountability, and yet we see little to none. Additionally, the league seems to have caught up to Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins, and despite how much he likes to praise his players and their ability to be multiple, he can't seem to do it himself. And when you're looking for blame for the Dolphins' shortcomings, the stubbornness and inflexibility of Mike McDaniel, to me, are big flashing lights.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think there's certainly been, some adversity, and I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do the thing, but there certainly
Thank you for not
has
doing the
been.
thing. I appreciate it.
There certainly has been more adversity thrown his way this season, this early part of the season, particularly on that side of the ball, because of the quarterback issues. The thing is that he at least partially is responsible for the fact that they didn't have a good backup quarter, because at the end of the day, like, he's responsible, Chris Grier is responsible, they're both responsible. But they both played a part in the building of this team, because we know Chris Grier at this point. We know his MO is, I'm gonna collaborate with my head coach, and I'm gonna give my head
This
coach.
is perfect for Brain. This is perfect because this was literally the next bullet point that I have on my list. So go off, King.
Yeah. So, like, they're both responsible. We know who Chris Grier is as a GM, that he's going to collaborate heavily with his head coach, and he's going to get his head coach the players that he wants, and he's going to rely on his head coach's evaluation. And honestly, any good GM is, at least to some extent, going to rely on his head coach's evaluation. So when Mike McDaniel evaluates his quarterback room, if he goes to Chris Grier and says, our backup quarterback situation is shit, then Chris Grier is going to go out and he's going to get a backup quarterback. He's going to address it. But if Mike McDaniel says to Chris Grier, I like the progress that Mike White and Skylar Thompson have made, and I feel confident going into training camp with those guys. And then he sees them in training camp and he says, I feel confident in going into the preseason with these guys. And then he sees the effort that they put out in the preseason and he says, I'm still good with what we have there. This is an open competition, and whoever wins it, as bad as they've been, they will be fine for the regular season if we need them to be. And lo and behold, a game and a half into the season, we get that situation where Tua gets hurt and we have to rely on our backup quarterbacks. And it took a game and a half for Mike McDaniel to realize, no, this is really, really bad. And these guys cannot run my offense. And he has to go out off the scrap heap to get somebody. And so this is, yes, Chris Grier ultimately is responsible as the GM for putting this roster together. But because he so heavily relies on his head coach and his input there and his evaluation, when even if the most staunch Mike McDaniel supporter would say, well, he's been dealt a bad hand and he got unlucky with the Tua injury. Well, the fact is that the reason why the backup quarterback position is so bad right now is because Mike McDaniel severely, misevaluated what he had there, because the Dolphins had the resources. If they wanted to and they felt like they needed to, they could have gone out and spent money at that position, but Mike McDaniel misevaluated it. So if the backup quarterback is the biggest reason why this offense has struggled so mightily, and spoiler alert, it is, there's other reasons, but it is the biggest reason, that still falls on Mike McDaniel. It is still his fault.
Yeah, absolutely is. Absolutely is. So big Mike McDaniel. Anything else you want to say about the build of this team? Because to me, that is another reason to not be terribly optimistic about the season going forward, is that I think we're already seeing the cracks in this build. As you touched on at the beginning, the wide receiver depth continues to be an issue. The offensive line is a big part of it, but I mean, frankly, offensive line hasn't even really been that bad when you look at the beginning of the season. But what we've seen from this team historically, I think it makes sense to expect that offensive line to eventually become an issue this season. And you have the fact that the Dolphins have doubled down on speed and agility and finesse, as opposed to investing in strength and the ability to win in the trenches, the offensive and defensive line, particularly interior on both lines. Like, I think those are areas where I am really worried about what this team is going to look like as we get a little further down the stretch. To me, the Dolphins are one-trick ponies, and they've kind of doubled down on that one trick.
Yeah.
And the one trick hasn't even worked.
Well, and look, it's one thing to build the team around speed and agility. I don't think there's necessarily a problem with that. And you can even do that on the offensive line, which is, the way this offense is designed. The issue is that 40% of your starting offensive line really doesn't even fit into that. And you could have addressed it. Like you could have addressed it in the draft. You could have addressed it in free agency. You could have addressed it in free agency after the fact, and they've been stubborn about it. They've just
signed Isaiah Wynn. You re-signed Isaiah Wynn knowing that he had this ridiculous injury problem.
And well, yeah, and the injury prone thing, that's a whole other piece of this build. And that's, probably the bigger indictment is the reliance on guys that have had extensive injuries, the injury records, the Teron Armsteads, the Isaiah. I mean, the fact that you go into the season, you go into the offseason every year and your offensive line is the biggest question mark. And you go into this season having lost your two best offensive linemen from last year. And you're going to go into this season saying that 40% of our offensive line are guys that are consistently injured. That, Isaiah Wynn misses more games than he plays, and Teron Armstead misses about as many games as he plays. And then you're also going to be, touting Robert Jones and Liam Eichenberg. Aaron Brewer's been a nice addition. I think he's been a suitable replacement for Connor Williams. Is he playing at the level that Connor Williams played at last season, thus far this season? No, but Connor Williams was playing at an absolutely elite level last season. And Connor Williams is not playing at that level this season because he's coming off of an ACL injury. So I think they did a nice job to bring in Aaron Brewer, but they did nothing else. And that said, the offensive line has not been the problem. But the thing is it's still not a strength. And if the offensive line was a strength, then you'd be better suited to bridge the gap when your starting quarterback gets hurt. And you'd be better suited to have longer term success offensively when certain things aren't working, because you'd be able to just be like, well, when all else fails, we've got a kick-ass offensive line that we could just maul people, or we could run the ball, or we don't need to play this, this offense with all these gimmicks and bells and whistles so that we can scheme somebody open in 2.5 seconds. We could play a more standard, you could still scheme things. Like, it only makes your job easier if you have a really good offensive line. So they're just you're already fighting with your arm tied behind your back, and then your quarterback gets hurt, and now you're fighting with two arms behind your back. And that's what we've been seeing here for the last few weeks.
Right. What is it that the Dolphins can't do? They can't be multiple. Let's talk about a couple more points here. Brain, given how, and this was a big one to me when I look, and it's a little bit more of the, you know what? I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to go to the next one. It's big players still coming up small. Big players still coming up small. Now, Tua obviously has been hurt, but he came up small in the Jacksonville game, most of it, and came up small for the entire Buffalo game before he got hurt. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. Too many times do these players, these so-called leaders of the team, fail to meet the moment. We hear a lot, Brain, about how the Dolphins have a loaded roster, but a huge part of being a top-tier player in the NFL is having the ability to rise up and make big plays in big games. The best players rise to meet the moment. And for the most part, the players on the Dolphins roster have failed to do that.
Yeah. Well, and again, not to just say like everything gets better when Tua comes back, but I think we've seen in the last few weeks without Tua, number one, opportunities for our best players on offense, being Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, are fewer because they can get open. And if the quarterback's not getting them the ball, or he's, throwing it to them inaccurately, that's not best utilizing their abilities. But also, when they've gotten the ball, I think they're pressing.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're trying to. I think Tyreek specifically is trying to do too much. And I think in general, when you are fighting an uphill battle with the deficiencies that you have at quarterback and the deficiencies that you have on your offensive line, it's on one hand, it's this balance where on the one hand, you're the team's best players. So when you get the ball, you feel like you have to make something big happen every single time because you have so few opportunities, and this offense has so few opportunities because of the quarterback play to actually make something big happen. And we've seen that. So I understand the desire to press and feel like you have to do too much. But then at the same time, you can't have negative plays. You can't catch the ball and go backwards because you're trying to pick up an extra 20 yards. So you end up losing an extra 3 or 4 yards. You can't you can't drop the ball because you're thinking about, the move that you're going to make after the catch. You have to be able to make, at the very least, the assumed plays. And that's what we're not seeing, or that's what we've seen a little bit too few of. We've seen too many of the mistakes from those players. And then on the other side of the ball, Javon Holland, granted, he's got the hand injury now, but Javon Holland has given up big plays. He has not made the splash plays on defense. Jalen Ramsey, another situation where you're a really good player, but you're a cornerback, and defense or the opposing offenses can easily scheme away from you, and there's only so much that you can do. But you really have to be playing at an elite level all the time. You have to be able to make your impact felt. And to this point, those guys have not made their impact felt so much, or to the level that it needs to for this team to ultimately reach their ceiling, whatever that ceiling is. So those guys need to be better. And to this point, it has not been good enough.
Right. And that's going to bring me to the last point that I want to make here. I mean, and then, you can throw in anything else that you want to add. And, and again, this is just some of the larger ones. But to me, given how the Dolphins have seen their season end, the last 2 seasons, we knew going into this year that the postseason success of this team, the theoretical postseason success for this team, would largely depend on whether or not this team is playing playoff games at home. And the slow start for this team, combined with their complete inability to even really be competitive with the Buffalo Bills, sees them looking at a mountain that they're going to need to climb if they aim to play one or more home playoff games this season. We talked about this. We talked about it towards the tail end of last year, how important it was for the Dolphins to win the division so they can get playoff games at home. And as a result of the fact that they couldn't do that, they lost that game, that Monday night game at home to Tennessee last year. That cost them, and then they, losing to Buffalo in the season finale, that cost them the ability to play a home playoff game. They'd ended up playing a home playoff game against Pittsburgh with an opportunity to break that streak and to get some momentum going into the postseason. So we knew coming into this year that they were going to have to do it this year. But this slow start, how they've looked, how they've given themselves a hole to climb out of, that now it seems like even if they are able to get out of the hole and make the playoffs, it seems likely, at least to me at this point, that they're going to have a hard time getting playoff games at home and thus being able to parlay that into a postseason run of any sort.
And so all I'd say about that is that you're not wrong. You're not wrong for saying that that's what it feels like and that's what it looks like. Objectively, they're nowhere near Buffalo right now based on the way that they've looked, the way Buffalo has looked, and the way they looked when they play each other. So you have no reason to believe, even if Tua comes back in week 8 and is healthy the rest of the season, even if all the guys that have injury issues are healthy the rest of the season, there is nothing that we've seen so far that would say that the Dolphins are going to win this division. And if they don't win this division, they will not have a home playoff game. I mean, nothing that we've seen so far would lead us to believe that the Dolphins are even going to make the playoffs, let alone, have a home playoff game. I'd be happy with a road playoff game at this point. But the fact is that we're 5 games into the season. Last season, the Miami Dolphins were 3 games ahead of Buffalo going into the last 5 weeks of the season.
Yep.
And Buffalo narrowed that gap. And granted, for that to happen the same way that it happened for Buffalo last season, for it to happen like that for Miami this season would require Miami doing something that they have not done in a really, really long time, which is play their best football at the end of the season. And we've seen, we have no reason to believe that that's going to happen. But it doesn't mean that it can't happen.
Right.
And so you can call it wish casting. You're probably right at this point. But it's not a 0% chance that the Dolphins are going to, that Tua is going to figure it out, that he's going to get healthy, that the offense is going to get better, that the defense is going to continue to improve, that the Dolphins are all of a sudden going to find themselves in position going down the stretch of having some really, really important football games. And when you look at some of those games that we've talked about at the end of the season that were like, boy, this is going to be really hard. It's going to be really hard to go into Cleveland and win a game in the cold weather. Well, I don't care what the weather is right now. It's not, and I'm not saying that it's a given that Miami's going to beat anybody on the schedule, but that game's not looking as difficult as it looked at the beginning of the season.
I think that, Brain, you are transitioning beautifully into looking at the rest of this season from an optimist's standpoint.
It wasn't an accident.
And we're going to do that in just a minute. But first, we got to have a word from our sponsor.
The DolphinsTalk.com podcast network is sponsored by Caneswear. Caneswear is the place to go for officially licensed apparel from the Miami Dolphins, Miami Heat, the Hurricanes, Florida Panthers, and all of the professional and college teams in South Florida. Looking for the latest jersey, a birthday gift, or the newest hat to hit the market of your favorite South Florida team? Check out Caneswear for their overwhelming selection of sports apparel. Located at 2655 South University Drive, Davie, Florida, Caneswear has it all. Not in South Florida? No worries. Visit Caneswear.com to shop their inventory from the comfort of your home, and they'll ship it to you. International fans, too. Caneswear.com is the spot that Miami fans shop. That's Caneswear.com, caneswear.com.
So before we took that break, you already started talking about things from an optimistic standpoint. And so we're going to continue with that trend right now, Brain. So let's look at it. And I think we can actually start with the point that you were just making. And again, some of this may feel like wish casting, and maybe some of it is, but we do want to present that there could still be a positive case for this season to come. If you don't think that there is, that's fine. Turn it off. Don't listen to the rest of the show. No problem. But, like we said, there are still 12 football games left to be played. And, I don't know about you, but I'm going to watch every single one of them. And so having a positive outlook for what those games might entail, I think is going to be helpful and healthy. So let's look at it. The positives. Brain, the Dolphins, in spite of mostly playing terrible football, and we said this on our mailbag show, in spite of mostly playing terrible football, the Dolphins have managed to win 2 of their first 5 games. What that means is that depending on how things play out in the Monday Night Football game, there are currently only 6 teams in the AFC with fewer losses than the Dolphins. If the Jets win this game on Monday night, then there's only 5 teams with fewer losses than the Dolphins. Regardless of what happens on Monday night, there are only 2 teams in the AFC that the Dolphins are more than 1 game behind. So all of this to say, there is a lot of football still to play, and the Dolphins still have just about everything they want within their control. Obviously, the number 1 seed is the thing that the Dolphins would really love to have. That is looking like it's going to be very difficult to accomplish because of the slow start. But in terms of winning the AFC East, that's still all in front of them. That's still all there to play for. So with all of that said, that path to that home playoff game that the Dolphins need is still wide open in front of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, the most important thing is the AFC East. Because you talk about home playoff game, well, there's only one way to get a home playoff game, and that's winning the division. If you don't win the division, you're going on the road. Plain and simple. So, granted, the elephant in the room there is that you need to beat Buffalo, and you had a home game against Buffalo and you got embarrassed. So I'm not saying you should feel confident or feel good that Miami's going to win the division, but the fact is that, like you said, it's all there in front of them. And depending on how this game goes, which right now we're about halfway into the second quarter, and the Jets have a 10-7 lead over the Buffalo Bills. If the Jets win this game, the Dolphins are a half game out. So
Even in the loss column.
Yeah. So anything can happen. It's a long way to go. And so are the Dolphins going to win the division? Are the Dolphins going to accomplish any of their goals if they play the way that they've played in the first 5 weeks of the season? No. If the Dolphins play the way that they've played in the first 5 weeks of the season, they are going to struggle to win more than a handful of games this season. But I think there are reasons there. I mean, there are obvious reasons why the Dolphins have gotten off to a slow start. And there are very easy pathways to things getting significantly better. It's not like this team is completely bereft of talent. It's not like this team has no track record of being competitive or winning games. So I still think it's all there in front of them. And this team I think it's more likely that this team goes into the last month of the season in the thick of a playoff race than the alternative. They go into the last month of the season as clearly an outsider.
Yeah. That leads me to the next point, which is the Dolphins have only played 1 3/4 games with their starting quarterback. if Mike McDaniel is truly the offensive guru he's made out to be, he'll root out the issues with the offense, make adjustments, and the offense will begin to fire on all cylinders and start to look more like what we saw the first part of last season. And because they will have played most of the first 6 games of the season without their full offense being implemented, perhaps the league will take some time to catch up to whatever these new wrinkles are that McDaniel implements into the offense. Plus, on top of that, we have yet to see the Dolphins' full complement of offensive weapons all on the field together. So that's another potential reason for optimism.
Yeah, what I would look at is, what the Dolphins have been able to do the last few weeks, running the ball up the middle. And what we saw in the last game, specifically against New England, was a commitment to running the ball up the middle and doing it with a rookie running back in Jalen Wright, who has been very efficient in his limited touches. Raheem Mostert is back to being healthy and looked very strong in that last game. And at some point, I don't know if it's going to be. I think Devon Achane will be back in the next game, but I'm not 100% sure. We'll get more news on that when the injury report comes out for this week, as far as what his status is. But I think the recommitment to not just running the ball, but being able to run the ball up the middle, and that being another tool in the bag, while at the same time getting healthy on the outside and getting an Odell Beckham Jr. into the lineup and getting incorporated. I think this team has a better chance of becoming multiple. And I think sort of finding a way to become multiple by necessity is what we've seen here over the last few weeks. And I've made mention of this the last few weeks as we've pleaded with Mike McDaniel to run the ball more and be committed to running the ball more and be committed to running the ball inside specifically. And the fact that they have done it a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and it had success in the last game, I do believe that could have long-lasting positive impacts on this offense going forward, because when the other things go awry and the other teams take away the outside run or they take away Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, the Dolphins don't need to be scratching their head to search for answers. They can say, well, hey, remember when we couldn't do that before and we had to just run up the middle and it worked? We can go right back to it. And that's how offenses, and that's how teams evolve, really, is teams evolve when they go through stuff. And I said I wasn't going to do it, but when they have adversity, it is an opportunity to figure out something new and a new way to succeed. And I believe that the Dolphins have shown signs. It didn't happen as quickly as I would have liked, but I think there are signs that we saw that things that they are learning, they are adjusting. Maybe it's not as drastic as we'd like. Maybe it's not happening as quickly as we'd like, but they have shown signs that they are figuring some things out. And so when this offense is at full strength, I think that only benefits them.
I like it. If you were going to drop the adversity is opportunity bomb, I like the way that you did it. Rain, another positive outlook here. And this is the last one that I kind of have prepared, and then I'll open it up to you to give me your thoughts. But the Dolphins defense has largely been fine. I had some concerns, like how much of a step back was this defense going to take going from Fangio to Anthony Weaver? And the defense has been okay. Now, there are some caveats to that. right? You take all of the Dolphins defensive stats, you have to take with a little bit of a grain of salt, understanding that they've only gone up against two really top offenses in Buffalo and Seattle. They've gone against three teams in the bottom of the league in offensive DOA with Jacksonville, Tennessee, and New England. They've also given up points on short fields because of failed fourth down conversions, missed field goals, turnovers. But, they've largely been fine for the most part. But again, understanding that, their yardage stats are a little bit skewed because they haven't been making teams have to go all the way down the field to beat them. But, all things considered, the Dolphins defense has been fine. And if the Dolphins offense can get to that level, the level that we would expect them to be at, then there's no reason that the Dolphins can't win with this defense performing the way it's performing.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just, just to further your point on the defense, and I agree the defense has been fine. I think it's been middle of the road.
Yeah, it hasn't been great, but it's been fine.
It's been fine. It's been great in stretches, but it has been gashed in stretches. And so the end result is it's been middle of the road. I think in addition to the points that you made about yardage being skewed because opposing teams haven't necessarily had to go the full length of the field, opposing teams haven't really needed to do much in the way of scoring in some of these games either. And they've been very, very conservative because they haven't been stressed. They haven't been stressed to like, hey, we need to hurry up. We need to take risks and throw the ball down the field. We need to create big plays because at the end of the day, they've been perfectly fine just running and punting and then kicking the ball to Tyler Huntley and Skylar Thompson and the Dolphins' dreck of an offense. So that plays into it as well. And that probably has more to do with it than anything else. But that said, the defense has been fine. It hasn't been the biggest issue on the team. I think the defense still needs to get better. I think the defense has its hurdles because, they already, were a man down as far as edge rusher were concerned, by starting the season with Bradley Chubb on the pup. Jalen Phillips looked really great in the first few weeks of the season, albeit on a snap count, and now he's gone. And so you're asking a whole lot out of Emmanuel Ogbah and Chop Robinson and Mo Kamara and Quentin Bell to consistently generate pressure. You would hope that your first round pick in Chop Robinson will eventually be able to make a significant impact this season. I would hope so. But honestly, from what I've seen in the first handful of weeks in the first 5 games, I'm not necessarily holding my breath that Chop Robinson is going to be playing at an extremely high level this season. I think he's got a very large learning curve before he's even really an every down player. And that was a knock on him as a draft pick. I do think the interior of this defensive line has been outstanding. At least the starters. Like Zach Sealer and Calais Campbell have been great. They have played at a Pro Bowl level through 5 weeks. The problem is that the depth there, which was an issue coming into the offseason and was an issue that they quote unquote addressed until they basically cut everybody that they signed to quote unquote address the issue. That is clearly still an issue. The depth on the interior defensive line is an issue. And so you got a guy like Calais Campbell who's playing at a really high level, but is only going to play 30 to 35 snaps a game. So when he comes out and you get that precipitous drop off, how do you manage to not get gashed in those moments? That's been a struggle. The linebackers. I think Jordan Brooks has been good, but it's not his strength to be in run fits. He's more of a pass coverage linebacker. I think he's been really great at times in his ability to cover tight ends or even backs or even in some cases receivers. I've been really impressed with him. David Long, I think, has taken a step back so far this season. We've routinely seen on, the Dolphins giving up these long runs where linebackers are in the wrong gaps. It's usually David Long. And then right down the middle of the field, Javon Holland, I think, has been very up and down so far this season. I think Javon Holland is still, overall, he's going to be a net positive all the time because of the things that he can do with his range in the secondary. He still has the versatility to come up and play, but you're not like Javon Holland is a guy that we're talking about coming into the season as earning a new contract and getting paid close to what McKinney and Winfield got paid this offseason. Well, he's not playing at that level. And I like Javon Holland, but he's just not playing at that level right now. And the Dolphins need him to play at that level. So I think the defense, this is supposed to be the positive part of the show, but whatever. I think this defense has been fine, but I still think there's a lot of room for improvement. So if I wanted to spin it positive, I would say Javon Holland has a track record of playing better than he's played so far. We'll see what happens with this hand injury or whatever. But if he plays better, if David Long, who has a track record of playing better than he's played so far through the first 5 weeks, and also some of it learning a new defense, cleaning up the run fits, that's something that can be cleaned up. It's not like a talent issue there. Those are mental errors. Those things can be cleaned up. And if those things get cleaned up, this defense will play at a little bit of a better level. And like you said, this defense could play the way they've played so far this season through 5 games. And if the offense plays where we expect it to, the Dolphins will be right where they need to be. If this defense actually improves, then that raises the ceiling that much higher.
Yeah, then you're looking at a very different story. Brain, do you have any other positive outlooks for the Miami Dolphins after 5 weeks as we get ready to look ahead?
I think the positive is still, kind of the big picture view of it, which is you're a game back in the loss column right now. You might even be even in the loss column with Buffalo after tonight's game. And you've got everything to play for. And it's not like you have this super daunting stretch in front of you. But the Dolphins just need to play it. They really, really do. They need to be the cliche right now. They need to be, we're focused on the game in front of us. And I think as fans, like the expectation of being a Super Bowl contender right now, I'm not saying it's impossible I'm not saying that can't happen by the end of the season, but to expect that right now is delusional.
Yeah. 100%.
And so right now, the focus should be this team needs to get better every single week. Take care of business in the next game against Indianapolis. If you take care of business against Indianapolis, you're going to feel really good about things going forward in the season. But if you fall short against Indianapolis and you fall to 2-4, granted, the season's not over at that point either. But then at that point, you're going to have a lot of people that say this team could easily be 0-6, right, and they're not wrong.
Right. So as you look at
just take it week to week.
That's all you can do. But I mean, you'll look ahead. I mean, I guess that's the other thing, right? That what once looked like a pretty daunting schedule for the Dolphins is currently not looking so bad. They're at the Colts this week. And again, they're going to have to grit out a win with Tyler Huntley against a returning Anthony Richardson, likely in that game. Then you get to host the Arizona Cardinals, which their offense has looked good at times, but their defense is pretty miserable. And that should be a game that you would expect the Dolphins to win at home. Then they go to Buffalo, which is almost a guaranteed loss. Then they travel across the country to take on the Rams, but the Rams are no great shakes at the moment. Then you play the Raiders, who look terrible. The Patriots, who've been awful, probably the worst team in the league. Then you have the Packers on Thanksgiving, again, in Lambeau, probably a loss there. Then you come home, you host the Jets, and the Jets are middling at best. You have a game against the Texans in Houston, which is a tough one. You host the 49ers. The 49ers have been kind of a mixed bag this year themselves. They have not been the juggernaut that most people perceive them to be. They go to Cleveland. That game against the Browns, currently, the Browns are just a complete disaster right now and seriously couldn't happen to a nicer guy. And then, you close out the season again at home against the Jets. So what once looked like a daunting schedule is maybe perhaps not so scary, but all of that is dependent on the Dolphins playing football that doesn't look like the football that they have played in the first 5 weeks of the season. And even if, yes, you can make the argument, well, they didn't have Tua. Well, if Tua comes back, they have to start looking more like the Miami Dolphins looked at the beginning of last season in order for this season to go anywhere. If they continue to play the kind of bad, disjointed, uncomplimentary football that they've played thus far in the season, then discussing strength of schedule is a meaningless, frivolous exercise, because then there's no hope at all. But as you said, Brain, let's take it week by week. And right now, it's all still play for. So let's go into it. And let's do that. And let's give Aaron one final point before we wrap up.
So this is not a point. I think that given everything that we've just talked about, I think we should give a record prediction. I think how do you think this, and look, obviously we're going to go week to week, but if you right now, today, knowing everything that we know, talking about everything that we talked about, what record do the Dolphins end up with, all said and done?
I'm going to say they end 8-9.
I'm going to say they end 9-8.
Okay. So 9-8 probably means on the outside looking in terms of playoffs.
Well, yeah, maybe. The way that,
but
it
almost certainly means they're not winning the division.
Yeah. You're not going to win the division at 9-8. Depending on how things shake out in the AFC, 9-8 could sneak into the 7 seed. Probably not, but it could. But so I mean, if you think they're going to go 8-9, and I think they're going to go 9-8, what does that make the Dolphins?
Same Old Dolphins.
There you go.
Thank you, as always, for listening to the Same Old Dolphins Show. Make sure you're following us at Amplified to Rock, at Aaron the Brain. The show is at Same Old Dolphins. Download, rate, review, and subscribe to the Same Old Dolphins Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, everywhere you get your podcasts. Subscribe to the Dolphins Talk YouTube video. Like this video. Comment on this video. Let us know your thoughts. Where are you feeling positive? Where are you feeling negative? Let us know in the comments. Make sure that you're visiting dolphinstalk.com each and every day. Make sure you're getting all of your gear and apparel at caneswear.com. We will be back on Thursday. Don't know what the show is going to look like because Thursday is my wife's birthday. So I don't know that I'm going to be able to do a show on Thursday because, listen, you got to be part of being a responsible married man is that sometimes podcast has to take a backseat when it's wifey's birthday. And so I'm going to hang out with the wife. So I'm sure Brain will be here in some form or function. Maybe he'll have a special guest with him for the Thursday preview show and the Thursday bonus segment. But regardless, there will be a show coming your way on Thursday to preview the game against the Colts. And of course, everybody on the Dolphins Talk Network, a lot of different shows coming your way all throughout the week to get you prepared for Dolphins at Colts this Sunday. Thank you for listening to the Same Old Dolphin Show. Thank you for being part of the family. Take care of yourselves and each other. And as always, go Dolphins!
John Jansen is a schmuck.